a little bit of introduction on the International CPTED Association. So welcome everyone to the International CPTED Association webinar. This webinar is regarding the CPTED School Guidebook. And the ICA is a professional non-profit global organization for all things related to CPTED. And this webinar is one of the many programs run by the ICA for preventing crime and creating safer spaces. My name is Shamir Rajudre, and I'm a director of the International CPTED Association. I also invite you to take advantage of the many programs we offer by joining the ICA. You can use the link provided on the screen or contact us if you have any information. We will be sharing more information on how do you become a member at the end of this webinar. Also, a brief disclaimer that the views expressed in this presentation belong to our guest speaker and do not necessarily reflect the position of the ICA. The ICA does not assume legal responsibility for the speaker's statements, the intellectual property, or the information presented today. Okay, let's begin the webinar. I'm excited to welcome all of you, our attendees and our panelists. We have with us Fleur Knight, Elizabeth Miller, Carlos Gutierrez, and Brene Bernard, and moderator Dr. Greg Saville, Jerry Cleveland, and Dr. Macarena Rao. I will now hand you over to our moderator for today, the ICA President, Dr. Macarena Rao, to say a few words to welcome our panelists. Over to you, Maka, and I wish you all a very good webinar.
Thank you, Shamir. I am very glad to be here. So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this incredible, interesting ICA webinar. My name is Dr. Macarena Rao Vargas. I am the International ICA President, as Shamir presented me. I am very happy and honored to introduce today the webinar of the ICA School Guide globally. The guide is an initiative of the ICA School Committee, led by architect Carlos Gutierrez. This committee is one of the several committees that the ICA has. The work of this guide has been multidisciplinary and multicultural, receiving feedback from different expert sources in very diverse social and cultural contexts. This guide is a contribution from the ICA to look at problems and solutions in a comprehensive, systemic manner. The focus of the development of the guide also applies to other areas of the neighborhood and community improvement. This guide presented today is only the beginning of the work that is permanently extended and seeks feedback from the different places and communities in the world where it is implemented. It is a living and organic document that grows with the contribution of everyone. To close, I would like to thank each member of the committee for the work and contribution that they have done to accomplish this incredible guide, considering that it is a volunteer work. I want to thank personally to Elizabeth Miller from Canada, Rene Berendt from USA, Fleur Knight from New Zealand, Mercedes Escudero from Mexico, Greg Saville from USA and also editor, Jerry Cleveland from Australia and also editor, and Jeremy Rear from the USA that was part also of the ICA. Finally, I want deeply thank to all children and young boys and girls who inspired this work. This guide is designing especially for you and the complete school community. Over to you, Greg, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Maka. Terrific. That's a great introduction. I'm Greg Saville, not Dr. Greg Saville, just Greg Saville will be fine. And Ren, if you could show that first slide, please. I wanted to share some website information with our speakers here, because this is being recorded and you'll be able to get it later on. So today's webinar has a global reach. We have representatives from half a dozen countries, 3 continents, 4 continents actually. We have broad experience from many professions. School teachers, university professors, criminologists, architects, planners, an attorney, and a special security professional. And so it's a broad reach. Over the past few years, this remarkable team has worked together under the umbrella of the International CPTED Association to put together what is surely the most advanced progressive strategy for school safety today, the ICA School CPTED Guidebook. If you're a member of the ICA, you will know that the ICA has already published some guidebooks. We have a guidebook on lighting, a guidebook on graffiti, and today's launch of this guidebook is our next version in the toolbox. It's available to all the members of the ICA, and it's comprehensive, as you're going to hear over the next little while. That's why we call it the comprehensive approach. Be wary if you're told that traditional CPTED always did social programs, or that CPTED is just about target hardening and access controls. Be wary of that, because it's not necessarily the case. What you're going to discover in this webinar is that there's a much more comprehensive CPTED approach using first, second, and third generation CPTED, and you're going to hear how that works today. So my name is Greg Savelle. I'm a co-founder of the ICA, urban planner, criminologist, and today's moderator. And I'm happy to announce today we have a special guest, and we're starting with that guest. His name is Jerry Cleveland. He's co-developer of second generation CPTED. He is a former high school teacher and principal, and he's also the co-editor of this CPTED school guidebook. So, Jerry, you there? Hello and welcome.
I am. Thank you. Thanks to and welcome to everybody. I am, as Greg said, a former high school principal. I worked in some rough areas of Toronto, and I've worked in a variety of schools as teacher, vice principal, principal, guidance counselor, and I've also been involved in introducing CPTED into high schools. And I was the safe school principal for the northern part of the Toronto District School Board, and that's me.
Yeah, and what Jerry didn't mention is that this happened a long time ago, before a lot of CPTED was being done, certainly before second generation CPTED was created. Jerry and I created it together, and a lot of that idea came out of the school work that Jerry was doing in Toronto. And during the process of researching and putting this guidebook together, a lot of the writers were asking questions about how you actually do it. In the late 80s and early 90s, there wasn't a lot being done. So Jerry, as a former Canadian high school teacher and principal, I think you were probably the first anywhere to really adopt CPTED into a school environment by asking students themselves to apply CPTED to their own school. So how did that come about, and how did the students respond?
Well, I was a vice principal and then a principal in a difficult area. And so we had a lot of crime on the campus. We had people coming onto the campus, and we had students going off the campus and being involved. So we really had to create a safe place. I'd been a police officer before I was a teacher, so I knew some of the details and some of the things you have to do to create a safe place. And I thought CPTED would be a good approach. But as an educator, I know that you cannot do things to students or for students. You have to do things with them. And if you're listening to this, and if you listen to anything I say today, make sure that you carry out your CPTED programs with your students. If you don't have a student on your panel, somebody who's there to advise you their perspective, who attends your building as a learner, then I think you're missing a person. So that's my first bit of advice. So I got a bunch of the students together, and I told them what their budget was, and I did it as a problem-based learning exercise, and they had to solve the problem. And so we went to other areas of the city, and we looked at why those things would be safe, and then we came back to our area of the city, and we said, why aren't we safe? So we kept doing this, and they had to find comparative models, and then they had to figure out how to use the small budget I gave them and what they could do. With kids, they always come up with immediate solutions. So they did this, and they decided they were going to put up a $245,000 fence around the school for CPTED purposes. And I told them they had $10,000, and that was all they were getting. And then they had to come up with some other solutions. And it was kind of remarkable, because the solution they had it's what introduced, I think, Greg and I to second generation CPTED. Theirs was almost an entirely affective focus, if you will. It was focused on things like the social cohesion in the school and the way that, the capacity building of the people within the school. And they ended up doing this award-winning project where they went down to Elmer Police College in Ontario and taught the police about what they needed to be safe in their own school. They also went and designed a bunch of, first generation CPTED things around the school, but that wasn't the part that impressed me. It was more how they had reached out to their community and brought the community, the police in this case, into the school, not in a traditional police way, but in the way that they found it best to make things work. That's how it got started.
There are people who say that how can the students know enough about CPTED, and that you need a police officer who's trained in CPTED to survey the school. Were you concerned about that at all, with the knowledge level of the students?
Not at all. I mean, those kids teach the police officers about their area, what's safe or what's not safe. See, what appears not safe to us is not what concerns them. I used to do this massive program on weapons and drugs, and they basically ignore it. What they were really concerned about are the behaviors of the people who would come into the school, like the police sometimes, or like other gang members or people who didn't belong there, and threaten them inside the school where they were supposed to feel safe. So what we think are safe issues, what we think are danger issues, may not be the same to them. So we have to be so careful as educators to recognize that the students bring as much expertise to these projects as we do.
Great. Okay, two more questions. One is co-editor of this guidebook. You know that CPTED has come a long way in the past few decades. It's no longer simply about physical modifications or target hardening. It involves social and psycho-emotional aspects. What do you say to CPTED practitioners who prefer to stick to the simple physical fixes like target hardening and CCTV?
It would be like saying to someone, and I'm sorry if I don't mean to sound insulting, but it would be like saying to a young person, we just want you to go to grade 1 and grade 2 and learn how to read and write. You don't need all that other learning that comes later on. It's not, you need to go beyond those things. They're great and they have a wonderful purpose, but they're not enough. Anybody who works in a school knows that what I called earlier, the affective environment, the environment where people, what they feel about their community, how they belong, how they solve their problems in that community. Those things are as essential in your planning for safety as putting in really bright lights and heavy locks. Anybody who works in a school who doesn't recognize that, or comes in and says, safety is about this thing and this thing only, it's too myopic. In my view, I like the phrase, to a person with a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And if you've got somebody in there just looking at a target hardening perspective, well, that's all they're going to see. But that's not what kids see. And why I advocate to have them on any panels that you run in your schools is because they will stop you very quickly from taking that approach. Okay. So I think that's how I would answer your question, Greg.
Okay. All right. And then finally, to set the context of the remaining part of the webinar, the final question I have for you, Jerry, is it's been said that teachers nowadays barely have time to teach the topics of the curriculum, and they certainly don't have the resources to do things like CPTED. So what tips do you have for teachers and school administrators as they try to make their school safe?
I love these projects that I did because I had a lot of the kids who were going to either be suspended or they were going to be in trouble or there was something happening with them. And we did all that. So I'd say you can get suspended or you can come and work with me on this project. I think we have to be divergent thinkers. We have to be creative, both in our discipline, our school safety, our curriculum, whatever it is we're doing. And I found a way to involve these kids who were, I won't call them troublesome, and some of them were not. Some of them were really good students who weren't suspended, but a number of them were kids who were in serious trouble. And they're the ones I want on my panel. So for me, it wasn't hard at all. And it's not a question of time. It's a question of, finding the imagination and the creativity and asking your students to help you do that. So I would suggest anybody needs to talk to the kids about how they cared because they wanted to fix the problem because they were in danger.
Right. Okay, thank you for that, Jerry. And I think you'll join me in congratulating the writing team to this. As the editors, we were very impressed with the product they delivered. So thank you for your opening remarks. And now let's begin the webinar. Renee, I believe you were going to start the webinar with some of your comments on your section. Over to you. Or Carlos? I think your mute's on, Carlos. Mute issues there, Carlos, please unmute.
There you go.
There we go.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining this webinar today. I'm architect Carlos Gutierrez Vera. I'm sending you warm greetings from Chile, the place where I'm at now. And first of all, I would like to thank the ICA for giving me the great opportunity of leading this high school committee, the CPTED High School Committee, with such a great team of colleagues, friends, to develop this work. The CPTED School Guide, with the comprehensive approach, next one, please. It's a way of seeing violence in school, taking into account the three concepts of the three environments that CPTED is composed by: the physical environment, the social environment, and the psycho-emotional environment. I really enjoy what Jerry was saying and regarding how important it is, take into account the social environment, the cohesion, how the school community is composed not only by the physical aspect. When we think about CPTED and crime prevention and violence prevention, we must think the three environments in which we always have lived as humans: the physical environment from CPTED first generation, the social environment, from second generation, and now with the CPTED in third generation, the psycho-emotional environment. The pandemic led us to endure such hard times many times, with emotions and feelings, and the psycho-emotional aspect has become very, very relevant. Many of the cases that you see in schools with violent behaviors, most of the time are related to psycho-emotional issues that the kids have. I had the chance to work for several years in Central America, and one of the things I did, it was CPTED in schools. And you see how the violence that is inside families in the communities, of course, is affecting the way the kids behave in school. And CPTED is a way of working with them to overcome all this harshness that they have in their lives. So the comprehensive approach is the physical, the social, and the psycho-emotional environment, the three of them together as a unit. Next one, please. So it doesn't matter with which environment you start working with. It could be the physical, could be the social, could be the psycho-emotional, because the three are strictly interrelated. They connect each other. So it doesn't matter if you start with working with the physical approach, the social, or the psycho-emotional. The important thing is that you always think the comprehensive approach regarding CPTED as a strategy for violence prevention, the physical environment, the social environment, and the psycho-emotional environment. So that's the idea under the idea of the comprehensive approach in CPTED. So next one. Now I hand it over to Rene to talk about the physical environment. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Carlos, and thank you to the ICA again for giving me the opportunity as well to share my research and my work to really explore the depth of the physical environment. And the first question is why the physical environment?
I think you got a mute problem there, Renee. Could you unmute, please?
Yes. And the first question is really, why does the physical environment matter so much? Because we have now a growing body of scientific and social scientific knowledge that we really, as humans, we're thoroughly embedded into our environment and into the environments we inhabit. And that means in all dimensions, in the physical, psychological, and physiological dimension of the term. And the physical environment is, of course, where we form memories and create neurological associations that we stay with us for the rest of our lives. And of course, during the formative years, we all spent a lot of time at school. So we want to make sure that for school children, we create at every age group the most enriching and beautiful environments to support the healthy environment. And of course, the biggest threat to a healthy development is actually anxiety and fear. So we want to, again, building on what Gary and Greg mentioned before, we want to build on what we know about how the environment impacts us and really provide a feeling of calmness and safety. And there's many ways we can do this. How can we perceive the environment? So one of them is through form. And when we talk about form, we understand nowadays the function of mirror neurons, which explain the visceral power of our response actually to form and surface-based cues. And just by looking at an object like a comfortable chair, we basically, or a flight of stairs, we basically associate the same kind of excitement in our brain as if we actually would be lounging on the chair or running up energetically up the stairs. We basically, performing this act. And so again, underscoring how important form is and the perception of form, and how we, as designers, I'm a designer, my background is an architect and designer of learning environments, how important it is to use form to that advantage. The second aspect is texture. And the scientific findings here confirm our complex psychological and neurological responses and association that come from materials, the textures, the colors, and the density of materials. And the social studies show, for example, that learners participate more in a group discussion if cushioned furniture and throw pillows and rugs are present in the classroom. Studies also have shown that repetitive lines create a very simple pattern and a texture just with the right amount of complexity and to stimulate generally inspiring, like a calming sensation in students. And of course, color is really very important. Many of our students, or many of us actually, really enjoy richly textured wood surfaces that dominate, can dominate a space. And we have schools that we're using wood beams, wood ceilings, wood wall panels, and really has a very calming effect on the students, and they really appreciate that. And again, as Gary mentioned before, the impact of the physical environment, of course, on cohesion is really enormous. The way we organize a school, the way we locate spaces next to each other, adjacent to each other, and how they relate. Are they physically connected or are they visually connected? And there's a picture here of a school, a middle school, and all those classrooms they have a lot of transparency towards the hallways. And so if a student walking alone in a hallway, he or she still feels very connected to the rest of the school community. So we eliminated bullying and vandalism because there are a lot of eyes in a very natural way on the students. Again, this also provides a sense of belonging. So again, there's always connections formed, even if you're physically separate from one student to the other. And really, it promotes responsible behavior because students know that there are eyes on them. I mean, in a good way, not in an oppressive way, but of course, it promotes responsible behavior. And of course, now the psychological impact of the physical environment, of course, we understand much more now. In our office, we are using a lot of biophilic design principles that really bring us back to nature and addressing some of these fundamental needs we have to feel warm, secure, calm. Also, of course, now really a big focus on our work is trauma-informed design. A lot of students, especially after COVID, after the isolation, the mask wearing and whatnot, it really robbed them of a lot of social interaction for nearly 3 years now. So we're trying to repair with the physical environment, whatever we can, and of course understanding that then strategies in the social and psycho-emotional dimension have to occur as well. Again, mental health and wellness, there's now a growing amount of evidence that, of course, they're also largely affected by the physical environment and by the spaces we create. And I think now we're talking about
like how there's really light colors, for example, white or like birchwood and green, or it makes me feel like I'm outside in nature and I feel a lot more calm than dark colors.
Yeah, that was a great student feedback here from a school we just completed, and to really hear it from the students' voice, like Gary said, ask the students. They were part of the design process as well. And now Fleur is going to talk about the social environment.
Got a mute issue there, Fleur. Unmute, please.
Hello, my name is Fleur Knight and I'm a teacher from Orewa College near Auckland in New Zealand. Worldwide, the aim of the teaching curriculum is to grow responsible citizens for communities now and in the future. Even more pronounced with the event of COVID. But how has COVID affected students? Neuroscience educator Dr. Nathan Wallace explains that during the pandemic, students' frontal cortex has been engaged less often, leading to students being impulsive, being more susceptible to addiction, having less empathy, and developing a propensity to be big risk takers. In New Zealand, COVID has led to increased incidents of self-harm, anxiety, and eating disorders as students experience anxiety about returning to school. More than ever, students need to be taught functional, social, and emotional skills and how to communicate with people face to face. Next, please. By applying the social CPTED principles, students learn how to reconnect with people in their school and community. When students understand the culture of the people in the neighbourhood, they experience how a common purpose brings people together. With connectivity, students build resources and possibilities by linking neighbourhoods and accessing different levels of government. Students experience cohesion when they work with residents creating action plans to tackle problems in their community. And they apply capacity when they understand how too many of one facility or business can detract from community safety. As one student said recently, the effect of capacity is like having too many people at my party. By applying second generation CPTED, students outwork the 5 C's of positive youth development. Next, please. The teaching of CPTED strengthens students' confidence, connections, character, and ability to care. Scientists have discovered that youth who develop these 5 C's also develop a 6th C, contribution to self, family, and society. A student with the 5 C's of positive youth development is less likely to be on a trajectory of risk and problem behaviours, such as substance abuse, delinquency, and depression. As the positive youth development perspective increases, positive behaviours also increase. Next, please. As students connect with their wider community and work with locals, they also learn about health, how to work with community to identify issues. They work cooperatively to create solutions. They work on technology, where they identify, problem solve, construct solutions to problems. They work on the arts, where they co-construct works with communities. They work on languages, where they write reports, audits, emails, research, note-taking. They learn how to relate to other people when they communicate with people outside of a school setting. They manage themselves by being on time for appointments, getting work completed on time, but also managing responses when others have different points of view. The social principles of CPTED, when taught and actioned by students, cover all curriculum areas. Dr. Alistair Wells will now explain the impact of teaching CPTED to students. Next.
I'm Dr. Alistair Wells from Auckland University of Technology, where I am a lecturer of teacher education. I'd like to talk about how FLIR uses a program called CPTED to enhance its students' learning experiences. FLIR places significant emphasis on inquiry learning and on developing a supportive, stimulating and highly professional environment where children are given the opportunity to be active participants in authentic learning experiences. These experiences are derived from situations investigated by students using the CPTED model and involves students undertaking an investigation of a real community issue that focuses on analysing safe environments. Lave and Wenger discuss how the significance of real-world learning is captured by the concept of situated learning, that is, learning that takes place in the same context in which it is applied, is considered an active method of learning where students participate in the co-construction of knowledge. They also argue that this kind of learning allows individual learners to participate, interact, and inject their own ideas as ways for growing personally and making informed decisions by processing information using visual and auditory reasoning and reflective abilities. Managing learning experiences that originate and are co-constructed and defined by the learner, where students play an active role in their education, means re-evaluating the pedagogical approach to one that is more reflective of co-agency. That is, students, teachers, parents and communities work together to help students progress towards their shared goal.
Over to you, Greg.
Okay, thank you, Fleur. Now I think we're going to talk a bit about the psycho-emotional, or what's called third generation CPTED. But before we do that, I have two questions I just thought I'd interject here. One for Renee, one for Fleur, maybe Fleur and Jerry. For Renee, your discussion about the textures of an environment and the sight lines of an environment, those are all critically important, I know. But I know a lot of folks have talked to me about schools, and they're concerned about what is a plague here in the United States with what are called active shooters, or school shooters who go in with guns and things like that. What thoughts might you have about the defense against those kinds of situations? Is it just about locks, or what other strategies might we do? That's for Rennie. Unmute, Rennie, please.
Okay, now I unmute. Yeah. Thank you for the good question. And this actually, our approach reminds me a lot reminds me of the approach that Gary mentioned when the first idea was to build a fence, build a fortress around and not let anybody in. And then the students actually realized that social cohesion and connection to the community, bring everybody together, would actually create a much safer environment. The same is the fact here that the adults worry a lot about guns and all these things. The students worry about that last. But for them, daily bullying, which is affecting up to 50 to 70% of students nowadays in our schools, is a much more present threat to them. So, however, I want to address that we do have intruder scenarios. That means every piece of glass we have in every school can also be secured, the visual connection can be reverted through roller shades or blinds. And we create in many classrooms a safe zone where you can't see into from the hallway. So if there is an intruder event, we definitely want to make sure in these, thankfully, rare occasions that we can protect the life of the student as much as we can. However, for the everyday situations, it's really about the social cohesion and the school community that matters most.
Okay, thank you very much. And Ren, if you could just stop sharing for a moment so we can just see the next two responders. So this is for really the two teachers in the seminar, which is Fleur and Jerry. So Fleur, you and actually Jerry talked about this inquiry-based model, or this problem-based model of getting students to work on real-life problems. It occurs to me, though, if you're going to do that, that the teachers in themselves actually need retraining or need to know how to do this. Well, what are your thoughts about training for teachers? Maybe if we could start with Jerry and then go to Fleur.
I would say that you need to do that, but it doesn't have to be anybody coming in from outside. I think if it's just making them aware of what it is. And I know budgets, as a principal, I know budgets are always an issue. Whenever you hear training, you think, oh my God, I got to pay for someone else. I would suggest that it's not hard to do this. The ICA can certainly provide you with information, but you have to actually have people knowing what they're talking about when they're doing these problem-based learning projects with the students, because there's some principles that they simply have to know. And again, that's why you would have this booklet that these fine authors have produced for you. I would say that if I'm going to do any work at all with students, I'd also make sure that I'm bringing in, as part of my team, an outside perspective as well. So I would include the people who are causing the problems. I'd go out and talk to the OGs in my area. I would make sure that I invite them to the basketball games. If they don't feel like they're part of the school community, we're in trouble. My philosophy as a principal was if I suspend them out the front door, they're climbing in the back window. So it's really important that we have to include the parties, not just the ones who cooperate and get along with us. And I think I'll turn it over to Fleur.
Okay, Fleur.
So I think the important thing is that if the students learn about the principles, they actually have some muscle behind their learning. If they learn about the principles, they're able to, first of all, by learning the physical principles and the social principles, they're actually able to understand how those principles affect the way that people think, feel, and act in different environments. And I think that is crucial, because once students understand the principles and then begin working on, for example, doing an audit of an area from a student perspective, then they are able to look at things that they think need improving, but also they're able to tie it back to something that is actually related to the community, that's related to other facets of, police, town planners, that sort of thing. So what happens is we empower our students by teaching them this, and it can be easily integrated into the social sciences, the science, as Renee was just talking about, the science of of using different colors and textures. It can easily be integrated into the languages that the students use. But the biggest improvement that I've noticed is it gives the students' work purpose.
Right. Excellent. Okay, thank you to you both. Okay, so Renee, back to the slides. I think we're going to go to the third concept, the psycho-emotional environment. And I believe that Carlos, you're going to tell us a bit about that. So Carlos, over to you.
Thank you, Greg. Well, the psycho-emotional environment is considered part of the third generation CPTED. Next one, please. We have to think that childhood and adolescence are foundational. Before, please. Childhood and adolescence are foundational stages of the development of well-being and mental health. I think that we all can relate to experiences we have when we were in first grade, second grade, third grade, all kinds of experiences. The mind takes information and keeps it there forever, even if we remember it or we don't. Every day, every hour, every year that we spend in school is a tremendous amount of information and experiences that we have and we keep for the rest of our lives. So the school is bringing us to a place where we are going to be fed for so many different sources of information and experiences, learning experiences, but also emotional experiences that will stay for us forever. Next one, please. So the human mind is still one of the biggest mysteries in human existence. And of course, it might look like, obvious, but each one of us have a mind. And from human mind comes creation or destruction. The mind and body are one unit and they feedback each other. A peaceful mind might bring peaceful actions. This sentence reminds me something that I heard from a lady in a community in Honduras, in the city of Tegucigalpa, when we were running a workshop, a violence prevention workshop, a CPTED workshop. And she said to me, if you take a close look, all the kids that are violent are not happy. She said, happy kids are not violent. So I always remember that sentence because if we take a close look to how are we living today, not only kids in schools, but most of us, many people are unhappy what they do in life. They have resentments, they have emotional pain, and all that is reflected in the outside world as many times as violent actions, and inside, when it goes inward, it might turn into sickness. So a peaceful mind might bring peaceful actions. A turbulent mind might bring turbulent actions. Human behavior is always strongly connected to the functioning of the mind. Next one, please. So the human behavior is always related to what's happening on our minds. Our inner environment determines our behavior, and violence at the end comes from a state of mind, which is supported by the social environment and expressed in the physical environment. Next one, please. We all have what we call emotions. Emotions are always strongly related to human behavior, and emotions trigger actions and reactions. Our basic emotions and feelings determine our behavior. That's why it's so important in school, kids learn how to identify themselves with emotions, to know them, to see them, to feel them, and not only to express them. Emotional intelligence is something that is very, very important for kids to learn in school. And of course, learning emotional experience is also related to so many other activities and actions that it might help in order to learn about emotions. So happiness sadness, fear, anger, surprise, disgust are the 6 basic emotions that we might recognize. All together, is what they create the feelings and the reactions that we have many times expressed as we might call, violent reactions or violent behaviors. So we must take care of our emotions, learn how to handle them, learn how to transform them in a positive way. That's why CPTED is also considering human emotions as a very important part in the 3rd generation CPTED. Next one, please. So finally, the human experience is always connected, very strongly connected to the physical environment, the social environment, the psycho-emotional environment. When all 3 environments are in balance, we move forward to a safer school community. Next one, please. Thank you so much. And now we'll hand to Greg and Jerry to talk about 3rd generation CPTED. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Carlos. So I guess the only thing I would add about 3rd generation CPTED is it's a relatively new theory and concept developed by myself and Mateo Mehinec, who's the executive director of the International CPTED Association. It's still the subject of scientific inquiry and research, although there's a significant body of research that backs it up. It has 4 basic principles. And all of this approach goes back to the original writings of C. Ray Jeffrey, who was the first person who wrote the first book called Crime Prevention Through Environmental Design in 1971, based on the work of Jane Jacobs in the 60s. And his approach was criminological and theoretical. And he wanted to see about creating much more integrative approaches to crime prevention. It wasn't just about one social, it just wasn't just about the criminal justice system, it wasn't just about physical target hardening, it was about integrating them all. And so that was his wish. Now, it didn't happen. What happened was CPTED evolved into the approaches of what Oscar Newman called defensible space, which is physical CPTED, or what we call 1st generation CPTED. Now, when Jerry and I talked about 2nd generation CPTED in the 90s, we were very cognizant of the social environment. But what's happened in the last decade or so is a revolution in brain research and neuroscience, which has shown us patterns that happen neurologically that make a major impact in criminal behavior and the motives to criminal behavior. And so 3rd generation CPTED talks about 4 main strategies, 3 of which are pertinent to the school environment, one of which is called environmental sustainability, which you heard a bit about with Rene when he talked about the role of environment, the role of physical, trees and the greenery and what the kids said about that. And there's a significant body of research talking about the impact of greenery on violent behavior, the impact of gardens and of tree canopies. There's direct relations there. So certainly that's part of the story. What's also part of the story is this business of social sustainability. Engaging the kids and the learning in the school with the community-based learning. And I think you heard both Jerry and Fleur talk about this concept called inquiry-based learning or problem-based learning, which engages the students in real-life learning outside of the classroom. And so that's certainly, this is social sustainability part of 3rd gen applies here. And then the third one, which I'll maybe bring Jerry in on, is the public health, the public sustainability and health, and how that plays a role with motives to criminal behavior. And there's all kinds of research going on related to fetal alcohol syndrome, and when students come with those kinds of backgrounds into the classroom's disruptive and it's just problematic. And also the brand new area of adverse childhood education, adverse childhood experiences with trauma in their early lives. Jerry, you've been doing some research. I understand you're writing a book on this stuff right now. Could you talk a bit about that?
As a matter of fact, I am. I'm with a teacher here in Pennsylvania. I've left Australia, come to Pennsylvania to write a book. We're writing it on just what you're talking about right now because it's so impactful. Those of you who don't know about ACE testing and about the Kaiser Permanente study, it's a 30-year longitudinal study. It's heavily laden with scientific evidence, so it's not just a fly-by-night thing. Have a look at that. And ACE scores talk about what happens to kids. As we've all said, you cannot see kids in just their school environment. You've got to see them holistically. Safety isn't a school construct. Safety is a community construct. And that's what Greg's getting at when he's talking about the public health and things like ACE scores. I work a lot in the Kimberley in the far north of Australia. And to go in there and try and do anything in those remote Aboriginal communities without first considering public health and considering the impact of public health on learning, to consider some of the environmental stuff that Greg talked about, because it is so important to First Nations, I think we do them great disservice. So it's not an easy thing to do this. You have to have, especially I think for the second and third generation CPTED, you have to have some history and some background and some understanding of some of the science behind this. But I do strongly encourage you, if you're taking notes right now, to make sure that you jot down ACE testing and then look up that Kaiser Permanente study, because it will help you understand why we're moving in the direction that we are with CPTED. I hope that answered your question, Greg.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Jerry. All right, now let's turn to Elizabeth. She's going to talk a bit about implementation and some of the obstacles and some of the ways we can think about getting around putting these things into practice. So Elizabeth, over to you.
Thank you. You can go to the next one, please, Shamir.
No, we've gone.
There we go. Yep, that's my slide. It's just in the wrong spot. That's all. So I'm just going to talk about a couple of projects that were implemented after working with kids in a school and at a school. So this is the Dan Warden Park project, and we were contacted. I was contacted by the school, who had a student teacher advisory group, and every year they would get together and they would work together as a group, and they would pick 3 priorities. And one of the priorities for that particular year was Dan Warden Park, which was a place where the kids hung out. There was some drug dealing happening in there. Some of it was aimed at the kids. Some of it was just because it was kind of a good area to do that. And the school was feeling like they were sort of losing some kids to that area. And so we went in, we talked with the STAG group. We sort of said, here's some of the things that we can do. And what do you want? What would you prefer to do? What tools would you like to use? So they picked a couple of tools, and we worked with this smaller group, but we also worked with a number of other classes. So we did a little bit of a CPTED workshop, so the kids understood the concept. They knew the language, and so we could talk to each other easier. The kids did like over 1,000 safety audits of that area. They got right into it, different classes. It was student led, but they worked with the planners, and we had a few other people that came in to help. And then staying with the school, like they decided where it felt safe, where it didn't feel safe. We did a charrette. We had the landscape architects run an actual charrette for the kids, where we took all of the information, what they wanted, what they felt would work, how they felt about where they felt safe, where they didn't feel safe, and the students went through the charrette and picked all of the things that they felt were top priorities for the rest of the students in the school. With that, they wanted to keep the benches, and you can see the lowly, pathetic bench on the left-hand side of your screen there. It was the paint was scraped off it. It had rude words on it. It was really in bad shape, and the kids just they would, sit there over lunch. They would, kick on it. They would do all sorts of things. And this was a place where the kids hung out a lot. They ate their lunch. They wanted it to be a safe space. We talked to the art classes. We talked to the welding classes, and the welding class actually built these new garbage cans and benches. So 2 garbage cans, 2 benches with the bottle baskets on them. The kids built them. We got them powder coated. The kids actually built the bases. The construction group built the bases for the waste receptacles and the benches, and so they did all the work. And there was very little graffiti vandalism or any sort of vandalism. Well, partly because they were made of metal, and so you really couldn't do much to them. But we did have a few markers and things like that. But the idea was that the kids built it. The kids were responsible for it. They came up with the idea, and that they would respect the space a little bit better. The school really liked it. The kids really liked it. And one of the most interesting things that came out of that was, if you look at the very top to the top picture on the right hand side, we included a seniors home, I guess, in the public input. And we actually had the students come over. So if you look at that picture, the two students that are standing up, they were actually one was a grade 11, one was a grade 12 student, and they were facilitating the same thing for the seniors that they actually went through when I taught them. So they took that information and then they put it out to another group. And so what they got was what the seniors wanted. And I would have hired any one of those students there. They were really very, very good. Next one, please. This is another example of taking that information. So as a planner, I'm a planner in the city of Saskatoon, and we do what we call local area plans. So we go into a neighborhood, we'll spend anywhere up to 18 months in a neighborhood, and we talk about all of the things that they want to talk about. Safety always comes up. And so when we go in to do safety, I go into the neighborhood and we typically talk to whoever's attending the meetings, but we also try and get into the school and do the same thing with the school kids. So this is King George local area planning process, and we went into the school and we actually we presented to a number of classrooms, but we also presented to this is a community group, these kids in these pictures. It's kind of a before and after school program. And so they earn money to go on trips that they might not otherwise go on. And we actually use them to deliver our notices for our upcoming meetings and safety audits and things like that. So this group of children were very, very invested in their neighborhood and in some of the work that we did. The middle picture is kind of fun because we went on a safety audit with the kids, and the adults came with us. And so as somebody was talking to the adults, I was directing the kids. I said, go find a place where you can, I don't want you lying flat on the ground hiding, but I want you to kind of hide. I want to drive home the fact of natural surveillance and some of those things and how parks can be used. And so there's actually 3 kids hiding in that middle picture, which when the adults turned around, they couldn't find them either. But it was very helpful because then the kids could talk to the adults in the same language, and you could hear them. One of the teachers was saying you could even hear them in the hallways talking about it afterwards. That's the impression it left. And my last slide, please, is just this one I kind of came across as I was doing the presentation, and it just drives home, I think, some of the things that Jerry and Fleur were saying about when you're doing this inside a school. So this was a different presentation that I did a long time ago. This is a group of kids that actually was my daughter's classroom. They were grade 5, and Tony is the little fellow on the very right-hand side of that picture. And in this picture, these kids are they're about 10 years old, 10 or 11. This was about 96. Just before this presentation, I happened to run into Tony on the street. Just graduated from grade 12. He was the valedictorian. And so we were just kind of kibitzing back and forth. And he actually said he still had his box from Box City, which is what we called the project that they were working on. It was larger than just safety, but the idea was that they were totally involved in it. They were directing it. They were designing their own city. There was another girl that was with him, and she was saying that, yeah, they were talking about it at grad, they were talking about it at after grad, and just to take that along. So that was grade 12. That would have been 2004. 2019, I run into Tony all the time because he just lives down the block. He's got 2 kids of his own. But for those kids to talk about that project for that length of time, do you think that made an impression on it? I would say yes, that made an impression on them. If they can remember that 10, 15 years after they actually completed the project. And I would suspect that a lot of these kids that are on the safety audits that are doing some of this work, some of the kids that Fleur has got, they will remember those projects and the things that they did and the people that they helped for a very long time. That will make an impression on them forever. And I'm hoping that I made an impression on some of the teachers and that they maybe were using some of this stuff as well. Thanks. Back to you, Greg.
Okay, thank you, Elizabeth. That's great. Great stories. I love case studies like that. It's gives you some real tips and ideas moving forward. Well, we have a couple questions, and I do want to go to a Q&A now. But before I do that, I want to go a roundtable, get a response from everybody on this. Before I do that, there was a question from Peter Murray about the. Let me see here. It was to do with the councils. It read, what start age do you need for students to be enrolled in the boards? Fleur, was that you who's talking about the boards?
Yes, I've had students involved in community boards and working with councils. It's been really interesting, a development actually, because when students start working on an initiative, what I've noticed that in the past, when students work on an initiative, sometimes the response from community has been quite judgmental in terms that they almost expect the work from the students to be quite low level. But what happens when you start working with crime prevention and you start working with the physical and the social and the psycho-emotional principles in the teaching, what happens is that the people from council that we've presented to actually were amazed at what the students learned and what the students' understandings were and what their perspectives were. So we had students that were asked by council to audit their local bus station because the council was concerned about vandalism and poor patronage by local teenagers, and local residents had a really negative perception of the bus station. And the students conducted a safety audit and they recommended things like, more braille facilities, clearer signage, fencing off the stormwater drains, connection of the bus station to the community. And initially, students conducted door-to-door surveys with 50 residents and business owners in close proximity to the station. And the survey revealed that the residents were keen to create an art group with the students to create artworks for their bus station that depicted the history and the culture of the area, because there was nothing like that around in the area. And the students worked with the community, and artists created artworks, the students organised materials and things, but the community actually did the work and the students organised it. Those artworks have been mounted now for a number of years, and the vandalism in that area has been significantly reduced. But also the main thing is that there's a real sense of community achievement.
Right.
Thank you.
That's great. That's a great strategy. Okay, I want to go around now to everybody on the panel, and I just want to get your feedback on one particular question that's popped up over the last little while. And I want to invite the audience, if you have any questions, please write them into the Q&A. We're happy to answer those questions now. Any of the panelists, you can address them to any one panelist or to the whole panel. It's up to you. So please take this moment and jot questions down if you have them, or thoughts or observations. Please add them in, and I'll bring them up as I see them in the question and answer chat section. So this is for the whole panel. We'll go around here. I just finished a project in California in a high school there where we had 20-minute videos teaching kids how to do CPTED on their own school and do safety audits, the kind of thing Elizabeth was just talking about. And they ran the videos, the webinars for the students, and students did their own project work, and they loved it. It was great. But the first thing that came back, the feedback we got wasn't from the students. It was from some of the administrators and from some of the parents. And then the feedback was if we have violence problems in a school, if we have concerns about safety in the school, why aren't we just talking about better locks, better lights, CCTV, bulletproof glass, and what's happening in a lot of the parts of the US is, why don't we arm teachers or put more cops in the schools? Kind of like the hardcore target hardening first-gen strategy. Why aren't we doing that? Isn't that the way to go? So I want each member of the panel to respond to that situation and come up with some ideas on words you might use to convince decision makers that the comprehensive approach is more effective, or strategies that might resonate with these decision makers. Let's start with Rene.
Yeah, actually, that's actually a great question, because I actually did a safety survey where I asked groups of students, parents, and teachers, because all of these stakeholders see the school in a totally different light. For teachers, it's a workplace. They want workplace safety. For parents, again, it's a place where they entrust their kids to, and the kids just want to learn and have fun and make social connections. So they all saw actually safety, being safe, in a different light. And for the students, it was not at all about any of these measures like locks or doors. And actually, we noticed many of these were actually considered threatening. If you start putting metal detectors in and have long lines where they're being frisked down by police, that is not a friendly environment that students actually want to go to. And it actually creates more fear and anxiety. So again, our understanding is nowadays that we want to create, make all these measures invisible. We have the right locks in classrooms, we have the right lighting and all these things. But again, this is not what's on the forefront. We want to create a welcoming, calming environment, which looks really friendly and open. However, these measures are, are kind of more hidden, in the physical environment.
Right, right. Fleur, I guess it's preaching to the choir in your case because you're already doing a lot of this, but what are your thoughts and what kinds of words do you offer to convince folks that the comprehensive approach is much more effective?
Okay, so basically it's about the students developing ownership of their environment in a nutshell, and having pride in their environment. The more they do with their environment to improve their environment, the more pride they have, and that reduces the level of vandalism and intentional damage, and it has in our school, for example. So it's about the students having ownership of their environment because they're making changes from a student perspective.
Right, that's great, thank you. Carlos, you're working in some of the higher crime areas in the world, Latin America, particularly Honduras. What are your thoughts on convincing folks away, I don't mean away from target hardening and security, but to be more comprehensive? What words do you use to convince people? You're mute there, please.
Yes.
Thank you.
Well, one of the great tools that we have as a CPTED practitioner is the cloud of dreams. This way of working with kids in which they make drawings, about what they want. I remember many times in Central America working with kids and asking them, how is the dream, the school dream that you wish like to have? How is your perfect school? And of course, they start drawing trees and playgrounds, and all kind of things, very nice, beautiful. And when you see that later, when you put the drawings through all the filters, you start realizing, and the principals, the teachers, they realize that that's that's the school they want. If you ask them to draw a juvenile detention center, of course, they will start drawing barbed wires and fences and strong gates. So you put side by side, what is the school and what is the detention center? How do you want your school look like?
Right.
So the answer, it comes from them. They know what they want. So that's been a great way. And the Cloud of Dreams, this methodology that we developed with Dr. Macarena Rao a long time ago, is a very great tool to ask without asking.
Yeah.
Because it's a way of asking by playing, by drawing, and kids love to do that.
That's wonderful. Thank you. That's great. Elizabeth, what are your thoughts?
Well, I'm kind of agree with Renee, and that safety means different things to the different segments of the population, I guess. And we find that all the time when we're in a neighborhood and we talk to the seniors, or we talk to the people that would show up at most meetings, or we talk to the young people. It's always different. And I think the more we put in those first gen hard solutions, I agree with Renee, the more the environment just does not look welcoming anymore. And if you're so worried about all these other things, that how do you learn? I kind of equate it to I went to New York, and I was quite surprised at how many police officers there were in Times Square and around Times Square, and they pull up in these big black these big massive things, and they all come out in what I would consider SWAT gear, but I'm from the prairie, so what do I know? and some people were saying, well, that makes me feel really safe. And I'm going, that makes me feel not safe. It's like, what's going on? What's happening? Because all these things are out there. And I think that sometimes is how the kids feel. And I think if we're helping the kids to manage themselves, then we help them to grow. And I think the words that I would use is comprehensive, youth-centered, like young person-centered. We don't give our kids nor our seniors enough credit. If you're young, you don't know anything. And then when you're old, you've forgotten everything or you're old, so you don't count anymore. And I think sometimes we need to give more credit to the kids for being able to come up with some of the solutions that they need and what's important to them. Yes, we have to make sure the parents feel safe. Yes, we want to make sure that staff feel safe going to work, but some of the things that come out of some of those suggestions are actually quite scary to me.
Yeah. Well, and we certainly found in California when we ran the video and webinar and trained the students themselves to do it, that the students themselves came up with ideas that had nothing to do with locks and lights and fences, and they themselves had ideas that were quite innovative. Thank you, Elizabeth. Jerry, you were a police officer in Toronto, in the Toronto area. You actually arrested people in situations, violent situations, many of whom were coming out of those high schools. And 5 years later, there you were inside the high school as a teacher and principal. How do you respond to this, locks and lights versus a comprehensive approach?
I don't think there's any discussion about among people who really know what's going on in schools. Kids don't want to live in prisons. Parents don't want their kids in prisons. Teachers don't want to be in those circumstances. And the whole concept of this ridiculousness, like Kevlar backpacks, I mean, just how silly can we get about this? You can't create a world. Well, let me use an example. We've had 46 presidents in the United States, or the United States has had 46 presidents in its history. 16 of them people have tried to kill. They're incredibly well guarded. 4 of them they actually did kill. You can put the most heavily guarded people in the world, and if someone's determined to do violence against them, they'll do it. It's exactly the same with schools. So what we have to do, and a couple of the previous speakers have talked about this, and I certainly practiced this in my administration when I was a principal, was you got to get out into the community and find out what's happening. You got to ask the kids. You have to have boots on the ground, if you will, for information. You don't get anywhere by making your place into a fortress. That way madness lies. The only way you're going to be successful as a school and keeping it safe is do all the right things in terms of the first generation CPTED stuff. But by all means, if you don't have an information source, you're in big trouble. My kids would tell me, sir, you have to be careful. The other gang is coming to the school today, so I could be prepared. The kids knew that I was a conduit. They could come and see me and talk to me about it. You have to establish those kind of relationships with your community members and with your kids and with your teachers and everybody in your community, or you simply will not be a safe place.
Right. Yeah, I think so too. Thank you for that, Jerry. So let's go to some questions. We're getting more questions from the audience here. Tom Lombard asks a question, which I think is tailor-made for Renee. So Renee, if you would unmute yourself. Here is the question from Tom. It says, does the built environment have an effect on crime in an area such as concrete pathways, steel light poles, metal railings, and so forth? Does the physical crime prevention sometimes create crime? Renee, over to you.
Yeah, that is a good question. I mean, actually, when it comes to some barriers, we have actually used barriers in the past around entrances of buildings, but there could be boulders or benches, more inviting actually elements that still prevent a car maybe from running into the school. So I think I would say, again, we're trying to prevent some of these incidences, but with measures that look more welcoming and pleasing. And I guess, how the environment can create crime, I would again say if the environment sends a hostile message and actually gets everybody into an anxiety and fear mode, then yes, I think one of these supposedly secure schools that look more like a prison, they create violence because, for example, one good example is concrete versus wood or steel versus wood. We started a couple of years ago to make all of our interior windows wood framed. And everybody said, oh my God, that's soft. And so, it will be all vandalized. And no, none of that happened. The steel framed windows, they were vandalized. They were scratched into and marked up and whatnot. So in a way, if you make something so robust that it's really asking for people to try to destroy it, then you're in a way creating violence. We made the wood windows and people actually cherish them. They protect them. They love them. So yes, I think the environment can create violence or the opposite.
Okay, thank you. There's a question here from David Calabro. He asks, what are some examples of good ideas that kids were able to provide where I could look at the aforementioned 20-minute video that in California schools? Well, I can talk about the 20-minute videos because I was the one that created this. If you want to contact us, David, we're happy to share some information with you. The second strategy is join the ICA and get a copy of the guide, because there are great examples in the guidebook. Anybody else want to offer up any examples? Elizabeth, you already gave two in your presentation. Any examples you folks can offer to the audience? Let's start with Fleur.
One example that seems really simple, but it's all about relationships, is students connecting with the elderly in their communities. Especially with COVID, for example, and having students going into rest homes and creating and forming relationships with the elderly, creating different perceptions about community safety. We've got a rest home quite close to our school, and the residents have been quite alarmed at times about these big, huge, tall people going past with big voices. But when they get to know the students and they share their life with the students and they develop relationships with the students, that changes the perception of safety in our community. And that initiative, for example, was initiated by students when one of the elderly in our community was actually assaulted by one of the students. So sometimes it can be it doesn't have to always be complicated. Sometimes it can be, what is the need? Let's get these relationships formed. Let's get people connected.
Yeah. Now, did you put some of that? I think you have actually incorporated some of that into your section in the guidebook.
Yes.
Yeah. Right. So David could see it there. Elizabeth, any thoughts on examples? I mean, I know you gave a couple in your presentation. Any others you might offer up? You're mute, Elizabeth, please unmute.
So for projects for kids to work on, I'm just trying to find the
examples. David's asking for examples
of kids working on projects.
Yeah.
So just wherever you can put, so wherever I go and I have access, or I look for access to who's not at the table, like whatever project you have to be working on. We're working with the local area plan, so we're inside another project. So we look for who's not at the table, who's missing from this neighborhood. If I was in a school, I would be looking for what kids are not there. Just like Jerry was saying, the kids know what's going on. So find the kids that knows what's going on, include them in the process. Things like feeding them, including it in something that's kind of fun to do, even a site visit, that kind of stuff where they can get out of school. All of those things will help include the children, and then you get that response. And I always like to take them through the process as well first, so that we're all talking the same language.
And maybe, Elizabeth, what we ought to do is get you to write a blog on the safegrowth.org website on that example, and David could read it in the form of a blog to make nice and clear. So
yeah, I see what you did there.
Homework assignment for Elizabeth. Sorry.
Great.
Yeah. Okay, Carlos, any thoughts on examples?
Yeah, just a quick thought. I would say that any project that is art related is very rewarding. We had the chance to teach many kids in Central America in urban art, graffitiing, all that kind of things, but in such a way in which they understood graffiti or art painting or mural paintings as a way of expressing themselves in a free way with no judgment. When you put that piece of canvas, a sheet, and you give them some cans of paint, and they start drawing what they feel like with no judgment, and later on they can talk about that, it's a great way of expressing themselves. So I think that any project which not involve judgment, I repeat myself, but that's very important, because one of the things that even Elisa was mentioning, kids don't know anything, and when you're too old, you forgot anything that might be useful. So by telling children, teenagers, you don't know anything, is a way of judging them, and they know that. So anything that it has to do with expressing themselves in a free way and something that they can learn later, they can even make a living making murals and painting. That's highly rewarding. That's for my own experience working with many kids in very difficult communities is something rewarding. It's a very good experience.
Thank you. And I'm just watching our time here. We're getting lots of questions. I want to be mindful of our timeline. Two questions. One I think is for Jerry. I'm going to leave it to the end if you don't mind. And the other was from Patrick McCauley. He's a police captain in Texas. He's one of our outstanding CPTED practitioners in the ICA. Patrick's done some exceptional work over the years. Patrick asks here, he says, in addition to programs to prepare and prevent, how do we build programs that allow us to recover after an event, after like a shooting event? It seems that comprehensive CPTED and relationships would have a powerful role in recovery and resiliency despite those events. Let's go to Renee, maybe because you've dealt with some after event programming in your architecture. Mute, Renee, please. Unmute. Thank you.
Yes, actually, my colleague, Jeremy Rhea, was actually tasked with redesigning a college where there was a fatal shooting, which actually, I think 10 or so students were actually killed. And going into this community full of trauma and really working with this community and understanding how you move forward from that, definitely. Again, that falls totally into second generation, third generation, working with the community closely, to doing the design process, because we were tasked as a designer to design a new building. And the question was, are we building a fortress or are we building a welcoming, open environment? And the community, even after this trauma, as a result of the process, opted for a really welcoming, inviting environment with lots of connection to the community.
Right.
Yeah. So.
Okay, thank you. And maybe the final question, because we're closing up our time here. This is for Jerry. And maybe I'll ask others to contribute if they'd like to, but primarily I'll start with Jerry. It says, reusing the comprehensive model, how do we support ownership for students and parents and adults using CPTED? It seems like similar bottom-up programs already existed and have already been implemented to create practitioners and student ambassadors, recycling programs, fire safety, and so forth. So I guess he's asking about how do you make this case, and implementation, I think, is what he's asking. Jerry.
Well, like every way that we create need in our human world, think about Maslow's needs. And right at the top of that need is safety. When I did my projects, the kids just felt really unsafe from the police in the area. There were lots of police shootings. They were highly motivated to educate those police about what it was like being young and Black and living in a community where you had to be afraid of the police. So those kids were motivated. When I did the thing with the campus safety, where the kids weren't feeling safe about the campus itself, their motivation is critical to any success. It's only bottom up. And I don't use the term bottom up, because really they're the ones who are the most important. Schools don't exist for teachers and for us. It exists for the kids. So the schools actually belong to the kids, and we're simply there to assist them. So I think if we reframe our thinking on that, we'll do much better in deciding which projects to do. One of our listeners talked about the Northern Territory, which has all kinds of challenges. And I answered by sending him or her, I'm sorry, I don't know what it was, by sending forward my email and saying, here's, I'll send you some things. But the government can only do so much. And what has to happen is it has to be a collaboration. I've worked a lot in Aboriginal communities, and if you don't get the community on board, you haven't got a chance. And Greg, you might want to talk about what you and I are trying to do with First Nations here in the United States, and how the same rules apply. If you don't do what they're looking for you to do, don't waste your time.
Right.
So,
well, we've reformatted the CPTED model into Safe Growth, which is a neighborhood planning model, which is all about building capacity inside the neighborhood first, and then bringing the technology such as CPTED to them, and then letting them figure out how to do it with your help and mentorships, of course. But it's got to be with and by the community. Otherwise, your long-term sustainability is significantly reduced. Certainly, that's a theme I've seen through this whole webinar and in the comprehensive guidebook. It's all about doing it with as much as possible. We may work at the branches of doing things to and for folks, but unless we're digging at the roots, we're not going to see long-term effectiveness in any level of violence in schools. So I think that's a good note to end on. Carlos, you were the chair of the committee. Any final thoughts before we turn it over to Shamir to close out?
Well, the first thing that I would like to say is that the comprehensive approach is something that it can not only be applied to schools. It's something that go beyond that, and it's a way of seeing, how CPTED is working in crime prevention in different places. Nothing is written in stone, and we claim and we request, the wisdom of the native people, the locals, the neighborhood, the lady that's around the block, the kids. Everybody has something to contribute to the safety in schools. The physical, the social, and the psycho-emotional environment, they always be there, you know. It's something that is not going to stay apart. It's always there. And there is no correct or incorrect way to begin working with the SEPTED environment. Each one of them is fine. All three environments must work in parallel, ideally. And the SEPTED in high school is just a framework for implementing the comprehensive approach. The SEPTED in school guide, you know, is a living document that will be continually updated, and we make a call to everybody around the world who's listening now, all the great audience we had today, to download, to become members of the ICA if they are not, to get the guide, use the guide, and start giving us feedback. Because as a living document, we will be improving, you know, and gladly receiving the information that we can get from all our members around the world.
Right.
So nothing else that thank you again to the ICA Board of Directors for the great opportunity to creating this guide. Please become a member of the ICA and download all the great information we have, and keep us informed about how you're doing with the guide. We'll be glad to improve and listen to your suggestions and answer your questions. So thank you so much for being with us today.
Thanks, Carlos. And before I go over to Shamir, Todd Schneider from Oregon asked the question, how can we all contribute to provide feedback on this outstanding book moving forward? And I think, Carlos, you just gave an example. Join the ICA, join the discussion. We have a committee set up, we're going forward. So please join our family. Shamir, over to you to close out. And thank you to the panelists for today's session. Great job, everybody. Well done. Shamir, over to you.
Thank you very much, Greg, and thank you very much to the panelists. Thank you very much. On behalf of the ICA, we would like to thank the participants and also the panelists very much for attending the webinar today. And of course, not to forget, please do fill out the survey forms for your attendance. If you'd like to scan your QR code, you can scan it. We've also already shared the link in the chat box. And of course, what happens is after you're done with the survey, you will be sent a certificate of attendance as well. And also, we have spoken about becoming an ICA member. There are many benefits to it, and of course, one of the biggest benefits is to be able to download the ICA Separate for School Guidebook, which was presented today. And as a member, you're able to download that for free, whereas non-members, there is a charge. So again, these are all vital information, vital documents, all which you would be able to get for free as a member. And of course, do check out some, if you'd like to register as a certified practitioner as well, please do go on to the CPTED site /ICCP and do check out our CPTED courses as well. Again, all of these are being shared in the chat box. So please do not forget to register yourself and get a copy. And also, again, there are many benefits and there are many more webinars that are going to be coming up. So please do not miss out on those as well. With that, again, I just like to thank everyone. Have a great day ahead and enjoy your weekend. Thank you very much, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Shamir.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you all.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Okay, thank you very much, guys. Thank you, Renee, for coordinating with me. Last minute.
Sometimes, yeah, I couldn't unmute. I don't know. Sometimes I just press unmute and it doesn't work. I don't know why, but
no problem. But thank you very much for being on top of the slides. I think you popped up at the right time. And thank you very much for staying on till the end. I think Maka is still with the community, so she was not able to join us till the end. But yes, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure working with you guys.
Yeah, thank you so much for putting it all together, Shamir.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.